within the limits of science. Let me give you an example. You say, well, if you can't test it empirically, if you can't do experiments on it, then it's not science. Well, by that let me give you an analogy. By the same kind of reason, you would never be able to tell who murdered somebody else looking at the clues, because you were not there, you did not see it, there is no experiment, you can do it, you cannot replicate it, you cannot do anything else about it. Except, you can look at fingerprints, you can look at DNA evidence, you can look at the circumstances of the crime, you can look at where the person is suspected to do the crime actually was at that time, and so on and so forth. That is, forensic science works by clues, by indirect clues that lead to reasonable conclusion beyond reasonable doubt. That's exactly the same way in which science works.
Dr. Pavlucci, can you tell us when or how plants evolve from animals, or vice versa, i.e. when did an animal or a plant give birth to the other type?
Okay, no, plants did not evolve from animals. The closest group to animals, phylogenetically speaking, that is in the history of life, is actually fungi. That's not to say that a fungus all of a sudden became a mammal. That's the way of a simplistic way of putting it. It's just that they share a very distant ancestor. As far as the when, I think the best estimate that we have at this point is about 1 billion years, or 800 million years ago, less than 1 million years ago. Now, when you think of animal in that sense, as I said, you don't think of a mammal, you don't think of an animal with skeleton even, you don't think of a worm even. It's what made it way too complicated. What you're thinking of, what should you be thinking of, are cells, which are structures, unicellular organisms, which are structured one way or the other. The unicellular organisms that gave origin eventually to the animal lineage share a most common ancestor with the same organisms, unicellular organisms that gave origin to fungi. That is not to say that fungi all of a sudden translate into human beings or bananas into mammals or things of that sort.
Okay, repeat the question, please.
Can you tell us when or how plants evolve from animals or vice versa?
When or how plants evolve from animals or vice versa? Well, it didn't happen. God made the plants on day 3, he made the animals on day 6. He designed them for their functions of things that they do. I think if we go back and listen to the tape, we'll find Dr. Pavlucci did imply very strongly that fungi and animals have a common ancestor, but it didn't happen quickly, it happened slowly. Now, if you're from Harvard, of course, that happened quickly. Like Stephen Gould says, punctuated equilibrium. So if you want to believe that, you're welcome to believe that. That's not science. That's not empirical. Fungi are still around today. Okay, why don't they do it again? Let's evolve something else. Let's evolve another animal from fungi. You've got plenty of research money. You ought to be able to do that in your laboratory. Okay.
Dr. Rowe, how do you explain dinosaur extinction?
How do I explain dinosaur extinction? I would say they're probably not even extinct. There are probably a few still around. I think that in the flood in the days of Noah, millions of animals drowned, and plants and everything else. The flood explains the coal we find in nice neat layers all over the world. Pressed plants. There's a layer in Wyoming, 10,000 square miles in the Powder Bluff Basin, whatever it's called. And some places 200 feet thick. I think the flood is the only explanation for the fossils at all. I think animals don't fossilize unless they're buried. And I think what happened to the dinosaurs after the flood, those that survived by being on Noah's Ark, probably babies of course, people killed them. All through history there are stories of people killing dragons. They called them dragons until 1841, when the word dinosaur was coined by Sir Richard Owen. There was no such word as dinosaur until 1841, so people were killing the dragons, and most of them exterminated by man. Possibly a few stragglers still alive. They're mentioned in ancient history. They find them on all kinds of ancient pottery. Artwork shows pictures of dinosaurs, cave paintings, cliff paintings. There's overwhelming evidence that they've lived with man. I'll cover that in video number 3.
Start back all over. The dinosaurs probably went extinct because of an impact of an asteroid. We have found a crater. The crater is still visible underwater outside of the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. There is geological evidence of the impact of that crater, and the material that meteor was made of was actually scattered all over the world. There are beautiful geological strata in Italy, for example, where I was born, where that show the same exact sequence and the same exact material as in the Yucatan Peninsula. All of these that are very difficult, if not impossible, to explain within a creationist perspective. And dinosaurs don't walk the earth right now. Just please find one and bring it here, and then I'll believe it.
Dr. Pavlucci, how does the Triceratops example prove evolution when they are all variations of the same animal?
Well, that's a matter of opinions, I guess. No, they're not variations of the same animal. What do you mean by variation of the same animal? Was that a kind? Biology is considered those very different species. In fact, some of those animals are grouped into different genera, which is a higher taxonomy category of biological explanations. So, no, they're very different animals, but not only that, that tree that I showed you, of course, goes back further than when I showed you, so it links back to other things that don't look at all, like Triceratops. There are other kinds of dinosaurs, and there are intermediate fossils. Now, does that prove evolution? Science is not about proof. And that's another myth that unfortunately is very common and widespread. Science is about our best ideas, our best explanation of how the evidence comes together. So, the best explanation that we have for the diversification of Triceratops is that they were related to each other. By the way, to say that because the fungi are around today, the animals couldn't possibly have evolved by fungi, is the same as saying that you couldn't possibly be your mother's son because your mother is still around. Doesn't make any sense.
One more time on the question.
How does the Triceratops example prove evolution when they are all variations of the same animal?
The Triceratops example that he gave is different reconstructions of different bones that have been found. Probably there were a variety of Triceratops. There's a variety of dogs. I think nobody would question that a Great Dane and a Chihuahua have a common ancestor. But they look awfully different. As far as you said, you asked the question, I've never been answered. I want to answer it, so you can't say that anymore. What is the kind? The Bible says very clearly, the animals will bring forth after their kind. So those that originally were able to bring forth, that is, reproduce children, are the same kind. The Bible kind is those that could bring forth. I said, you asked me to answer the question, how many animals are on the ark? I picked the number, said about 10,000, and you said, I believe in faster evolution or something. Yeah. Okay. You believe all the animals in the world, including all of us, came from a rock. You believe in something that's pretty hard to believe in, from my opinion. Okay? I don't believe the Triceratops evolved from anything. There might have been a variety of Triceratops. There's hundreds of varieties of birds, and hundreds of varieties of dogs. There might have been hundreds of varieties of Triceratops. No.
How do you explain Mendelian genetics?
Say that one more.
How do you explain Mendelian genetics?
Well, Gregory Mendel, the priest who did the study on the pea plants and all sorts of things, you know, the tall ones and the yellow ones and the green ones, he really proved that evolution can't happen. He proved that it's all part of a gene code that is locked in. You know, you can crossbreed your pea plants and you're always going to get peas. You're never going to get corn or tomato. And Mendel proved that it's limited to the genetic code that's already built in. Dr. Pigliucci is a plant biologist. He should know, if anybody does, have some kind of evidence of one plant turning into a totally different kind of plant. The monocot, dicot, and tricot is not a different kind of plant. Mendel, I think, demonstrated very clearly that evolution doesn't happen. But Mendel's work was kind of ignored for 50 years because Darwin's work was so popular at the time that everybody kind of ignored Gregory Mendel at the same time.
It's interesting to note that every geneticist that I know of is perfectly convinced of evolutionary theory. It doesn't have any problem with evolutionary theory. If you understand what Mendelism is about, there is no contradiction at all. First of all, Mendelism simply explains